and YouTube, and can be shared with everybody later on or in the meantime. And we are live. So, dear audience, welcome to the second day of the EU-India People's Summit and our panel, or rather conversation, on local governance, cities, urban futures, and the people who make the urban reality run and who actually do the governance. So, quick background on the EU-India People's Summit. It is an 8-day summit. Today is the second day. And the last day of the summit will be on the 8th of May, which is the actual day in which the European Union and India will meet to have their annual diplomatic summit. And in this EU-India People's Summit, we're bringing together voices of not just Europeans and Indians, but experts from around the world, activists from around the world, academics from around the world, politicians, to have a chat together about the topics that they care about, and to later then design the people's blueprint for the EU-India future. And we've designed all of our panels, all of our events, to have something to do with the actual topics of the European Union and India's collaboration. And according to the main document of the European Union and India, they both have a common interest in each other's security, prosperity, sustainable development, and are really committed to becoming more closely partnered, more closely connected. And a big part of their partnership is about urbanization and cities. There they have a partnership for smart and sustainable urbanization, for promoting investments in sustainable climate action in cities, disaster risk reduction in cities, developing effective solid waste management in cities, treatment and promotion of circular economy, the whole deal. And there really, we go all the way from very macro level things about investment projects down to sewage management and innovation in housing that the European Union and India have said, we want to tackle this. And we're going to tackle this today as well, because while international partnerships are crucial, what do they actually mean? And what do the people on the ground who will implement these partnerships actually do with the very broad targets that they get? And what problems might exist with those very broad topics, such as smart cities, sustainable urbanization? So what we're going to be talking about with 3 experts, who I will introduce shortly, are topics of participatory governance, resource management, the training of municipal and city officials, etc., etc. And because at the rest of the 8 days of the People's Summit, we have a lot of Indian and European experts, this is not simply a question that we have to discuss with geographic limitation, and therefore we're looking a little bit further, and we're going across 3 continents today with a Mexican perspective, a Central or Western European perspective, and an Indian perspective. And I'm especially grateful for the presence of our Indian representative, Manvita Baradi, because her organization is currently based in India, which is facing an absolute collapse of the healthcare system. And she is currently rotating and working nonstop. So we're extremely grateful that even though she has her head in a different space, she's come here today to join us. Of course, the same goes to Valeria and Frank, who, of course, are also affected by COVID equally. And I'm extremely grateful for your presence. So on that note, would you like to briefly introduce yourself, Manvita, for about 5 minutes? You will need to unmute yourself. Exactly. You're trying.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect.
Sorry for that. Thanks, Alena, and thanks for having me on this summit. And I'm very grateful that colleagues Dr. Frank and Dr. Valeria has also joined us on this. Yes, it's been last few days, actually weeks, has been really bad for India, and we're really trying to just be sane, I would like to say that. So I'm Manvita Baradi. I'm trained as an architect, urban planner, and I run the organization Urban Management Center, which is a non-profit for more than 25 years now. I've been also the Dean of Faculty of Management at CEPT University, a very renowned university which works on built environment issues. And I was the founder dean for the program in urban management. It is very important, and we believe very strongly that as a country, we have, say, great architects, planners, designers, engineers. What we lack is management. And a focus on training municipal officials and young professionals towards management is extremely important for us. And hence in my organization and also with the university, I do the same. And I strongly believe in working with communities and at the same time, local governments. And that's what we do. And I'll talk about it as we go along. Thank you, Alena.
Wonderful. Thank you, Manvita. Next, I just briefly ask Frank Moulaert, Dr. Frank Moulaert, to briefly introduce himself and what drives him. Thank you.
Well, Alena, when you asked me, when you told me that we would have to introduce ourselves in less than 5 minutes, I decided to write it down and to time it, because there is always a risk, you know. So I will read my little text, and I hope everybody will enjoy it and find it interesting. So my name is Frank. I'm Flemish, born in Bruges in 1951. And Bruges, for those of you who do not know, was one of the most successful medieval cities in Western Europe. And I still like visiting and studying it. In high school, I trained in science, mathematics, and languages, a combination which, strangely enough, stirred my motivation to study economics in Antwerp, Leuven, and Philadelphia. Step by step, my interest moved toward regional and urban development analysis, evolutionary thought, and innovation. I think humans and their communities are part of a larger, a bigger evolutionary system. And that's very important to keep in mind in these difficult times. I was a professor of economics at the University of Lille in France and of spatial planning at the University of Newcastle in the UK, not in Australia, and in Leuven in Belgium. And the real turning point in my career occurred at the end of the 1980s, when I was invited to join a team bidding to coordinate the Poverty Tree program of the European Commission, which is a program that was run by the DG Employment and Social Policy at the time. The team won the bid, and I became responsible for the research and evaluation in the Poverty Tree program. And very soon, I became involved in doing and coordinating research on the relationship between combating poverty and development at a local level. And influenced by the debates that started in the Western world in the 1970s on the role of innovation and local and regional development, me and my colleagues became very critical of free market-based and technological innovation-driven approaches to local development. So in a series of 7 EU-funded projects, not 15% of the budget, at some point you were insinuating this, I saw. In a series of 7 EU-funded projects, we laid the basis for a socially innovative approach to development, building bridges between different domains of human development and reconsidering social innovation as mainly driven by solidarity-based social relations between all people involved in a development endeavor. Doing so, we have worked with grassroots organizations, local authorities, civil society organizations to build and sustain socially innovative projects, especially in the context of neighborhood development. Today, our shared work on social innovation continues. It has led to more inclusive models of teaching and education, organization of research teams based on principles of social innovation, exploration of the relevance of democratic governance principles applied by civil society organizations, but also in research organizations, and more.
Wonderful, thank you, Frank. Then to our third participant, Dr. Valeria Guarneros-Meza. Quickly give us a run through about who you are and what brings you here.
Hello, everyone. So I'm reader in public policy and politics, and also deputy director of the Center of Urban Research on Austerity at the Montfort University in England. I'm originally from Mexico, but I've been living in the UK for 20 years now. And my research has been focused on this interface of public administration and citizen participation. Citizen participation either promoted by governments or local government or the state, or as well as citizen participation that it's organic, coming bottom up, let's say, and how these type of pressures is making local government change its way of organizing and providing services at a local level. And my interests have focused on urbanization in Mexico and the UK. But also lately I have been focusing on topics on securitization, which by that I mean how security thinking starts to permeate and cascade down on people's everyday living, but also how local governments respond to the provision of services with a securitized mind. And that's important in context of Mexico and Latin America more broadly, where there are high levels of criminal organization and in addition to a historical legacy of state repression against communities and different citizen groups. And finally, I have also been interested, the sun is coming very intensely, so I hope, well, the image is not very distorted. And finally, the last topic I've been focusing lately is on extraction and how the extractive industry is also impacting the way municipal government and citizens are being organized. So the extractive industries range from land grabbings to start producing agribusiness, but also the extraction of natural resources, so water, minerals, and hydrocarbons. And it's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be with Professor Frank Moulaert and Manvita.
Wonderful. So now that we've got the basics down and we've done our introductions, a quick note to the participants who are watching within the Zoom call and not on the live stream, that you're welcome to ask questions using the Q&A function. There is no Q&A section at the end, but rather we're having a conversation which has some points that we're trying to cover. And if you have questions, we will, or I, as the moderator, will try my best to weave them in and make sure that they're covered. So just put them in the Q&A box. So to start our conversation, I have some figures. The European Union spends a lot of money on urbanization. The European Investment Bank is involved in India quite heavily. They've financed 3.66 billion euros since 1993, mostly in energy and transport, but also in water and sewage. The European Investment Bank is involved in a water purification plant in Andhra Pradesh, which is in central India. And the EU agency Agence Française de Développement has a smart city project where they're investing around 100 million euros, which is around 800 crore rupees, for India's smart city mission. And the Indian government is doing the same. They're also investing, I think in 2014, the Modi government invested a $1.2 billion investment in smart cities. So there's a lot of money flowing. And this, of course, begs the question whether this makes sense. So I have a question addressed to Frank. which is about the idea of, first of all, deconstructing what is this smart city thing? And then also, do we need expensive, high technology, really innovative, expensive devices in local governance? Could you give me your insights on that?
How many minutes?
Not too long.
No, I won't use too much time. Yeah, smart cities is one of these very confusing terms. I mean, there are similar terms in similarly confusing terms in our practice and our knowledge fields, such as social capital, for example. I think there are 126 definitions of social capital, some of them overlapping, others contradicting each other. But the main, coming back to smart cities, the main and the mainstream meaning of a smart city is a technology-driven city, especially a city that is driven by economic efficiency principles, that is driven by huge investments, as you were suggesting, and by the figures you were giving. And this often has as a consequence that the strategies that are behind the smart city idea are very focused on, yeah, I would say elites of the population, preferred sectors, privileged sectors of the economy, and very often exclude the needs of people who have no shelter, who have no decent food, who have no access to sanitation services, to elementary health services, and so on. And some of the contemporary technologies can help in providing these services, but they are not essential. And the essential challenges here are redistribution, reallocation of resources to health services for poor people, reallocation of sanitation equipment to neighborhoods who have been deprived of such equipment for a very long time. If we look at figures for large-scale, the impact of large-scale investment projects on water sanitation in Jakarta, for example, it's only a small part of the population, only a small part of the urban territory that is served by these huge infrastructures. And 3/4 of the city is just struggling to get rid of the sewage or to find access to piped water, let's say. So there is a big problem there. And the mainstream view of the smart city philosophy is not addressing that problem. Quite the contrary. It's very focused on applying high technology in a relatively small area of the city. And usually it's the area of the city where the most privileged part of the population lives and where the business center is focused.
Thank you. This does bring me to another term when we're talking about terms that can be defined. I'd like to bring up the term frugality here. I think a person who's in the audience here today made me aware of the concept of frugality, which is this idea of doing more with less. And here I want to address Manvita of what is the importance, especially in a pandemic situation where we have not just limited resources, but no resources at all, of doing more with less? And how do we kind of use less expensive technologies and quite primitive technologies instead of going all out on with a massive budget on smart technology?
Thanks, Alena, and very interesting situation we are in, and very important question to answer. What is less and how much we can do with less? You know, India is a populous country, and giving that example of what we see day in and day out, people are extremely creative. They know there is a resource crunch, whether you are an urban poor household, so you know your income levels are less, but they have found ways to survive, to look at from whatever they earn, they can meet ends meet. Now, how does that happen? You have to be extremely innovative about it. So if you're talking about governments and large investments flowing in, if you consider people's voices, you would be very innovative. If you ask them, they have the answer, but you should have the time to go and ask them. Who does it? Very few. You have also examples from, I was just reading a few hours back actually, banking for urban poor. Now, a woman, and we have many examples, but this one particularly wanted to say, open a bank account. The bank refused to open her account because she wanted to save daily 5 rupees. Now, the administrative charges on somebody just saving 5 rupees, it's, I'm not going for the conversion, but it's meager if you consider euro or, the conversions in pounds and US dollars. So it's a very little amount for banks to allow her to save. Now, what this person did was just have a banking correspondent. These women came together, formed a cooperative, and they started their own bank. Now, that would be the way forward probably. You know how frugal economies are. You know how people know how to survive. They have the answers. You just need a catalyst to bring them together. And that is what we also have done since many years. Even in the pandemic world, where we realize our kids in slums and slum-like communities did not go to school and has not gone to school for last 1.5 years now. What we gave is a Raspberry Pi, a computer, not very expensive, you know that. And they could conduct the seniors in the basti or settlement took the lead to teach other kids. They would come together, have a class within their house, and that's how, how frugal technology, or give them internet, a Wi-Fi card. That's what we've done, and created ripple effect in where a small investment or a small thing can magnify to the larger population. So it's extremely important concept. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. I love that you're weaving in little stories to really show that we're talking about people today. We're taking those ideas of urbanization and innovation and really putting in the stories. So I hope that we can keep this up. No pressure to come up with any innovative stories. Valeria, when we had our, I guess, getting to know each other chat a few weeks ago now, you were quite vocal about the training of municipal officers, and that they often, they're not bad people. At the same time, they just often do not understand what is asked of them. And even if they get some expensive grant and money thrown in their lap, they don't know how to use that properly. Can you walk us through your thought process there again and what your research has found?
Yes, so those points were based on the Mexican experience. So I don't know if this is going to apply for the Indian case, but I think there might be, some coincidences, and perhaps Manvita can, chip in and tell, her experience through the UMC. But what I was talking about at that time was that in the Mexican case, municipal government officers are the less professionalized, the less educated, the ones who receive very low salaries, and consequently also they are not ready to start implementing complex projects that require a lot of training and knowledge creation. So I'm thinking here about things that have to do with climate change, or sustainable issues where there's a lot of technical scientific knowledge that is required in order for management processes to be aligned along, you know, the points that science is underlining. And these officers generally tend to be marginalized because of the context that they are not very well educated. They receive very low salaries. They receive no training from central government. So there is no civil service at the federal level. It's somehow limited, but civil service doesn't exist at the subnational, let alone the municipal level. So because of these shortcomings, then municipal officers do not know how to cope with projects that are regarding environmental issues or climate change issues that are affecting their communities directly, and that they are the ones who are experiencing how their communities are reacting and suffering as a result of climate change or environmental issues. Environmental issues, I'm thinking here again of the extractive sector, when you have mining corporations or hydrocarbon corporations arriving to the community or the locality, destroying the landscape in order to extract the minerals or resources they're looking after. Now, municipal officers don't know how to react to this. And partly because they don't have the knowledge, but partly because corporations deal with federal government directly, overlooking the competencies and autonomy that municipal governments have, at least in the Mexican Constitution. So this puts municipal officers in a very marginalized situation, and the only thing that they end up doing is accepting the terms that the corporation, in support with federal government, are establishing for the community to accept. And municipal government officers do not have the let's say the information that it's important to counter or challenge the decisions that corporations are taking. In the end, the corporations end up running the municipality as opposed to municipal governments and municipal officers, you know, being responsible in attending the community's needs. And that's problematic. That's what I meant at that time. I don't know if I'm covering what you wanted now.
Pretty done, yeah. You've got it down. You already expressed that you'd like Manvita to comment on this, and that was also my wish, because I know that Manvita is working closely together with, or UMC in general, my apologies, is working closely together with local governments to improve sanitation systems, for instance, to improve waste management. And what is your experience there? Is it just a laziness, a lack of competency, a total confusion about who does what? Let me know.
Yeah, tough call. We've been working with municipal governance systems, whether it's municipalities or state governments as well, because in the federal system, urban development is a state subject. So many decisions are made at the state level, but cities are supposed to be delivering those services. And some cities, larger cities, are a bit more autonomous than the smaller ones. That's the situation in India. The smaller cities are much more at a loss because they look for guidance from the top tiers of the governments. They were earlier much more innovative, I would say, before, and we have a very important decentralization amendment to the Constitution, which is 74th Constitutional Amendment, which we refer. And local governments are supposed to be doing a lot more, including urban planning, etc., etc. So, but the full decentralization hasn't happened. And still the state governments and a lot of times central government as well is giving a lot of directions than local bodies doing on their own. So in that frame of things, how much power has a municipal officer got? He or she is fired he or she cannot be fired by the will of the elected body. They are mostly hired by the state government, and the heads of cities are also hired by, the commissioners are hired by the central government in many cases. It's a cadre, like the your civil servants cadre. So so they have to deal with your population, the citizens, and sometimes there is a disconnect. And so constantly stating the priorities and somebody to mediate between them becomes important. And that brings in sensitivities of our local officials. And that job becomes important to train, retrain, to bring to focus the needs of the community and citizens. That becomes important. I would say technical know-how is easier to get to them, but those softer aspects, the participation, the aspects where you care, where you connect with people, becomes an issue, and that's a big requirement, I would say. And thanks, Valeria, for getting me to add this. Thank you.
So then we get to our third person with the European perspective and also some other perspectives that you've gathered throughout your life. Frank, hearing this, do you have any thoughts or comments?
On the training of local civil servants, or?
Well, since the European Union and India, in their strategic partnership agreement, my go-to source for the preparation of this event, the EU and India have agreed last year to enhance their support on city-to-city pairing, cooperation between Indian and European cities on urban development, and have officials themselves get together and exchange and transfer know-how and capacities between the city governments. And I'm wondering whether European cities are that type of all-knowing mastermind who can share their knowledge with others, or whether they face similar problems, actually.
You mean smart masterminds? Yeah. First of all, I don't think that you can compare cities in Europe to each other, especially with respect to the issue we're dealing with. A lot has to do with the personalities of the mayors, the high-level members of the city council, and so on. If they have a very open mind, they will cooperate in an open and efficient way with their agencies, the agencies in the local government. So if you compare cities across Europe from that point of view, you will get a very uneven picture. My main concern today is the way in which civil society organizations work with or do not work with local authorities and their agencies. Civil society organizations have become major players in the European welfare system. I will not say welfare state, because they are doing work for the state in a way. And this phenomenon is visible since the launch of the more proactive, self-responsible social welfare approach, the so-called third, what is it? The third, I keep forgetting this very elementary term, where citizens have to become more self-responsible and proactive to find a job and to provide themselves.
Neoliberalism?
No, it's Tony Blair's fantastic, Valeria, help me.
The third way.
The third wave, exactly. So since the third wave, the state has externalized a lot of its responsibilities with respect to service provision and so on. And as a parallel movement, we see that civil society organizations have taken on many of these responsibilities, have provided services, often in a way better than the state ever did, but at the same time with resources that are much more limited, meaning that the opportunities to provide these services are or have become very, very small. But what we know from our research is that many civil society organizations have managed to develop a type of governance that is much more democratic than the governance we find in most of the cities. So when we look at what we call socially innovative experiences by civil society organizations, we noticed that a large part of those experiences is experiences with cooperation, co-decision making, participation, and so on, going far beyond we call it a quite naive view of participation, in which citizens are allowed to express their opinion, but then nothing is done with it. So civil society organizations have bit by bit developed a kind of a kind of power to make democratic principles which they have applied also work in their interaction with local authorities and with agencies working within the local authorities. And that's how we launched, by observing what was going on in Barcelona, for example, that's how we launched the term of bottom-linked governance, not just bottom-up, because that is to a large extent a naive approach to collaborations with local authorities and the state, but bottom-linked. Why do we think bottom-up is a bit naive? Because, for different reasons. Very often, the bottom-up doesn't manage to produce the connections with the local authorities that are needed. Very often, they are most productive if they can work with an already open-minded local government, local authorities that reach out to the people. But a lot of bottom-up organizations, we have already also noticed, they believe that they can do the things without the state, that they can mobilize without the state. And that in most cases is not possible. There are examples of autonomous movements, and we're quite aware of that autonomous movements launched by civil society organizations can work very well. But bottom-linked is not in contrast to bottom-up approaches, but it is a model that is based on cooperation between what we call enlightened civil society agents, civil service agents, local agencies, and so on. We have seen this happen quite often in food councils in Brussels, also based on witnesses from some of our colleagues, and in other cities. Local food organizations, local growers, local distribution systems, community supported agencies, and so on. They have their own trajectory of growing food, distributing food, bringing food to the people. They talk and they work together with the agencies and the local authorities which are responsible for promoting, for example, urban agriculture, or for promoting local food security, and so on. And step by step, they develop this kind of mode of co-learning, cooperation, changing systems of decision-making within the local authorities, and so on. So that's our understanding of how bottom-linked governance works. And I think it's a very interesting learning ground of how socio-political transformation can be built up bottom-up.
We will get back to this topic, I think, quite extensively after a short interjection by Anuband, who is also part of the organization team of the EU-India People's Summit, and he has a burning question for one of our panelists.
Hello, so I'm Anuband and I'm based here in Paris. I have a question regarding the waste management, garbage management issue which was raised. which I think is a very important aspect of urban planning, but often it is given less priority, not just in developing countries, but sometimes also in developed countries. So I wanted to bring you to an example. For example, when I was in India, I was working in Bangalore. And as perhaps you already know, the situation there was, and I guess it's still very complicated on this aspect. So the cities, the local municipalities were giving contracts to private contractors to manage the waste, and they were paid on account of the number of kilos, the weight, of the garbage that they would carry, not process, carry. And what they would do, that they would just find villages in the vicinity, where they can literally dump it. And I visited few sites. There were huge piles of putrefying waste. Then all sanitation problems, the water getting contaminated, the local people getting diseases and all. But even to that, the contractors were literally pouring water on the garbage so that the weight of the truck becomes higher. They would get more money and all, So that's one aspect. And then the workers didn't have gloves and other material because it was, the target was to reduce the price. So that's one approach. We also see that the Modi government promoted also the Swachh Bharat mission, but it was perhaps a way to put the onus, the responsibility on citizens, at the same time not doing what the authorities and government should do. So my question is how to get garbage management to the center stage, for both governments and people, because I think it's a collaboration. So that's about India. I would like to relate it to Europe because we know that the rich countries, the developed countries, are also one of the bigger polluters. We know that the West is sent to China, India, and other developing countries. China recently refused now to take any more garbage, and now it's Turkey that has accepted. I also know an example where lorries from Belgium, for example, with garbage are dumped illegally in France. In some newspapers or on television, I saw. So here again, we see that there's no coordination, and the economic model is to consume more, which creates more waste, but we don't see serious efforts in dealing with this problem. Your views on this? Anyone? Thank you.
I think Manvita would be the ideal candidate to comment on this, precisely because UMC is also one of the main implementing partners of Swachh Bharat, as well, as far as I'm aware. So go for it.
Okay, so we are supporting the government to better implement Swachh Bharat mission, but we are also, I would rather go from the point of view of we are the technical support unit for urban livelihoods mission. Now, under Swachh Bharat mission, a lot of changes did occur. The country had to create landfills, create toilets, but our question began from where are the people to maintain it? We are creating infrastructure, but who's going to maintain it? So on the other hand, we have communities and lots of people who are involved in the sector, but there is no dignity and there is no safety. So we are coming from a point of view of supporting livelihoods, people who are already engaged in, say, waste collection, waste segregation, because whatever you described, the main problem is segregation. If you're not segregating the waste, if you don't have mechanism to transport it segregatedly in a designated landfill site, all what you described will happen, and it's happening. But where are the people? Who has educated these people, who are working with them to collectivize, give them dignity of their labor, and pay them the fair price? So that's our angle to it. The urban livelihoods also include sanitation workers, who are not only maintaining public and community toilets, where, and those toilets is for our international audience to understand, toilets which are kind of constructed for communities, the slum or slum-like communities or low-cost housing areas, and also public toilets on the main markets, etc., needs management, and city government's equivalent would give them a management contract to a self-help group. So our aspect is women groups, if they want to, no, not by force, if they want to maintain it, you give them training and they would be better placed because they are probably from the same community. So that's our angle, writing a appropriate, a fair contract with them, because the contract mechanism in these cities are so very difficult. The self-help group will not be able to get a contract. Maybe a private sector would then, bag the work and then not do a good job. So instead of that, if community comes together and starts maintaining those infrastructure, it's much better. But then comes a question of their safety and security, their insurance, their fair wages, and giving them a PPE. They have to have appropriate wares to work and work clothes to be in. So PPE becomes very important. So that's our aspect on the waste management. The other question you asked was how can such things be looked at differently? For instance, you cited example of illegal dumping, etc. If we look and think globally but act locally, that will be an appropriate way to go forward. Countries have to collaborate. Like there is a EU-India partnership, but there has to be learning processes between the regions and then cities. And that would be a way forward, I would think. Thank you. Maybe it's a long answer, but I hope I've covered it.
I have been timing you and it was not long. So we've now kind of covered the fact that there's two approaches to governance, one of which all in the room appear to not like as much, which is this technocratic, expert-driven governance approach. And what the people here have been advocating, if I hear correctly, is more the idea of incorporating low-cost technologies, making sure everybody talks to each other, and therefore having this kind of democratic governance, innovation, service provision, resource management idea. And one burning question that comes up there, which I'd like to ask to Valeria, is regarding the homogeneity of the community. Frank already criticized the idea of having a bottom-up, since that is too utopian, too naive. But even within his bottom-linked idea, when we have a democratic-driven governance and we talk to local communities and we use and draw on community networks and existing informal institutions, how unhomogeneous are they? How homogeneous are they? And what challenges come up there, specifically in the Mexican context that you've been working in?
Okay, so yes, civil society or society in general is heterogeneous, and yeah, that's something that it's one of the challenges to bring different groups together and try them to discuss ways that that is going to be beneficial for these different groups. But in Mexico, but I would say also Latin America more generally, there's been one issue in particular that has brought different groups together, and that's the experience of being marginalized and exploited by broader capitalism. And this results more in material terms, it results in experiences of displacement. So communities being displaced because some area in the city is going to be regenerated, for example. but also displacement because of corporations or mega infrastructure projects are going to be built, and they need land to build these mega infrastructures. So huge airports, very complex network of roads for transportation and maritime sort of links between the roads and maritime routes to transport goods and services. And communities are being displaced. And they are experiencing what the geographer David Harvey has coined as accumulation by dispossession. And this means that people are being expulsed from their territories, from their neighborhoods, their communities, in order for capital for the economic growth to develop or to acquire. And this is very much the rationale behind constructing huge mega infrastructure projects or building infrastructure for extraction. So we are talking about mining and hydroelectrics or hydrocarbon, which are infrastructures that are quite massive. So although these communities are very different in backgrounds, in geographies, in ethnicities, in how they perceive the world, because many of these communities are indigenous and they have a critical approach to the European understanding of what's a state. One of the commonality amongst these different communities is this experience of displacement, exploitation, and marginalization. And it is identifying this commonality across different group of civil society or communities that can then bring them together and discuss and learn and relearn how they can overcome this sense of marginalization, exploitation, and expulsion.
Wonderful. I'm going to pass back the ball to Manvita on this, since I think that there probably are a lot of things that resonated with her. Correct me if I'm wrong. And just ask you the same question of drawing on informal networks and informal institutions in community participation and how that works and what challenges arise. And then you can take it from there.
Sure. It's extremely important that the organizations who are working in this space communicate with each other. And also, I mean, I don't know how much you know, but the whole aspect of communities coming together, creating their self-help groups, like 10 or 15 women would come together, they interact, they make their own community, or community-based organizations are other bodies which would be informally created within settlements are important for them, and kind of they would solve their own problems. For instance, if there is domestic violence, or for instance, the water is not coming in the taps, or you are faced with garbage collection issues, which is a municipal function. And so if community takes leadership and takes onus on themselves to go to a municipal office and lodge a complaint, or use an app to lodge a complaint, all of that is possible if you take control in your own hands, not waiting for government or top down somebody to come and deliver it to you. Yeah. So for instance, as these, it's important that communities come together. Now, informal networks would be important because if one community has solved such an issue, the other needs to know. So typically what we've done, like probably you asked a question about city-city partnerships, we do community-to-community partnerships as well. Like for instance, our group from Bhubaneswar, self-help group, came to Ahmedabad, where I live, and where our project site is, and met with the communities here. It was huge. I mean, though even the language of communication was different. In Bhubaneswar, they speak Odia. In Ahmedabad, they speak Gujarati. But communicated and bonded like second minute. Like the same instance when we talk about when city managers of one country meet city manager of another country, they find a third way of doing work. Like, how do you run your city? How do you run your city? And they have a third way of finding methods and resources to learn from each other and move forward. Similarly, it was really a moment for us. We thought about it, but it was such a huge success that such networks are important. And city partnerships, similarly, community to community partnerships become extremely important when we're talking of working with settlements, urban poor households, and more distressed communities.
This leaves us with the thought that, of course, participatory governance and really involving communities is possible. At the same time, it's not always done. And I was talking to Frank previously, and he brought up his rather sad histories and stories in which he had to deal with very fake participatory processes. And Frank, could you tell us about whatever story comes to your mind in which civil society organizations created a plan and that was then totally discarded and ignored, and how bottom-linked governance, which you introduced earlier, would approach that differently and make sure that changes are actually done in a way that everybody agrees with?
What a question. First of all, I'm all in favor of participation. But second, I observed that in many Western cities, participation is used as fake democracy. I mean, people can express their voice on a regeneration project, for example, or on establishing a new park, or extending the natural area in the fringes of a city, and so on. So once this opinion, public opinion is established, you see that cities deal with this advice of the people in very different ways. In some cities, you will just get a response from the local authorities saying, yes, but yeah, the land you are considering is owned by this important private corporation or by this big landowner, and there is nothing we can do against this. I mean, it's a matter of private property, and private property, individual rights, and so on are one of the first principles of Western society, in a way. In other cases, you will have local authorities who will examine the possibilities to buy the land or to make it public, or to look for particular legal instruments which will allow to use private land for public or collective purposes, and so on. A third case is that it could be very well public land or public property. And in that case, you could say, well, then it's straightforward. No, there is the voice of the people. You use that land to extend the park and so on. No, municipalities may have completely different ideas about how the voice of the people should be used. And they may turn this park idea into a kind of mixed project, in which, yeah, some housing is built, some offices are built, and then maybe 20% of the original park surface remains. So these are the, if you like, the pessimistic stories. There are also the optimistic stories in which, yes, the opinion of the people is respected, and the municipality will do whatever it can to make sure that the land becomes available to build a park, to build a public space, to make sure that a buffer between a very toxic highway and the living area is built, and so on. So we have very different experiences with participation, but the main tendency is really that, yeah, to me, it's fake democracy. And that's why I very strong believe in this model of building up bottom-link governance. You have in every country today even in a country like Belgium, you have hundreds to thousands civil society organizations working in all different existential fields, as we call them: housing, food provision, security, education of kids who have poor access to schools, and so on and so on. These organizations have quite often a long experience dealing with local authorities, trying to convince local authorities to work in the same democratic way as they have worked with their membership, with their clients, and so on. CSAs, for example, are a good community supported agriculture networks are a good example of how decision making can be made. Collective land trusts are other examples which I could elaborate on in great detail in the Belgian situation, but I won't do this. It's a matter of trying to explain to local authorities the democratic practices that have risen and have been developed and have been improved within civil society organization and networks. And I want to make a very important point here. Western societies are very sick in many, many, many respects. We are poisoned by this drive for efficiency, this drive for profit making, this drive for growing ever more. The flip side of this at the individual level is, I wrote it down here, see if I can find it. Too many notes, I'm a bad professor from that point of view, is suspicion vis-a-vis other human beings, is paranoia, is problems of interpersonal psychology. We have seen many good projects and organizations fail because people do not trust each other, because people always think there is an individual agenda in the mind of some of the major players in a new initiative, and so on. So in the relations between human beings, both in civil society organizations and in local authorities, the understanding of interpersonal psychology is very important. We have coordinated a few projects focusing on this, and it really helped to have, I wouldn't say to have a psychologist or a psychiatrist on board. No, it helped to be very attentive to this kind of personal sensitivities and to let people speak up and make sure that their concerns, how ridiculous they may sound to some of us, that are taken on board. It's a factor that is very often underestimated. If I could go on, I could say that it is a factor that has led to the failure of many new political regimes, but there is some truth in it. I'll stop here for a while. So.
Thank you for those incredibly critical but well-grounded words. If there's anyone in the audience who is in the local government, I do encourage them to use the Q&A function to drop any comment that they have, and then I'll try to incorporate that. So Valeria, earlier you said that often in citizen consultation processes, citizens don't know that there's the option of rejection on the table. And is this structural? Is this intended? Or is that just because of everybody's rushing and trying to get to some goal and some project implementation, and they just forget to emphasize that you could also just say no? How's that?
Yes, so that point I made, again, based on the Mexican experience. And based on the Mexican experience related to big mega infrastructure projects where there are big business interest behind it, with very close collusion with powerful economic and political actors. So as Frank was saying, participation can work as fake democracy, and I agree completely with that. Because what federal government, politicians behind decisions that federal government takes, in collusion with big corporations, what they are doing is using this language of citizen participation as part of the corporation's policy, sustainable policy. So, you know, corporations are very clever, and slowly they are incorporating this language of sustainability, sustainable development goals in their corporate responsibility policies. So one of the main aspects of the sustainable development goals is participation, citizen participation, bottom up, try to, you know, include citizens in the policy making decisions that are affecting their localities and so on. And corporations then are cleverly using citizen participation, but in doing that, then they are managing and circumventing and giving different meanings to citizen participation. So these, what Frank was saying, this bottom link element is non-existent. It is all rhetoric, and one of the things that corporations alongside governments are doing is they, I'm just trying to go back to the question. Can you just remind me the question?
My question was about the option of rejection and whether that is structural or intended.
Yes. So what they are doing is they are posing to communities options that are cornering communities to accept what the corporation and government officials want. So they are not presenting options or alternatives that the community could have by rejecting the policy, the program, the project that the corporation and governments are aiming to develop. What here NGOs, for example, that do human rights, so that have a human rights agenda, for example, can do is precisely help communities understand that there are other options, other alternatives for them to say no to what the corporation and government agencies are asking them to do.
I love that you put out a call to action there. That really again shows that researchers and academics don't just sit and type, but they actually give concrete steps and help shape how things are done. Manvita, I see you nodding quite a bit, and I want you to respond to Valeria's worry that the Mexican case may not be one-to-one paralleling or mirroring the Indian example. Of course, India's big, Mexico's big. We're generalizing, but what parallels do you draw?
We have an act, and in a way, it is mandated in our constitutional amendment to have citizens' participation. And India also brought out a citizens' participation law, which has not been passed. So you can park it. And there are discussions, but there are so many nuances to it that probably we won't be able to cover in today's discussion, but sometime later we should talk about it. But on the first point, which I said, the constitutional amendment talks about devolution of a lot of functions to a local body, and also formation of within a city, there are many wards. I don't know, maybe you call them districts or you call them, so the city is divided into various wards here. And each ward would also have a representation of people to discuss, make their own budgets, and then kind of bottom-up budget making process is what is being propagated. But in reality, who would become the voice of that? They are linked with the government. It's not truly representative. And when we argue with the government that, look, we should strengthen the decentralized bottom most tier of participation, and people come together, discuss whether it's municipal as Frank was talking about, whether you want a park or a certain infrastructure, XYZ, who has the time for that? Who goes to such meetings? And who represents most of us? Who are they people? Who they are maybe linked to the political people and they have a certain angle to it or vested interest. Unfortunately, that pure participation does not really happen. And that's our greatest worry. Even while, and I totally agree with Valeria and Frank when they talk about bottom linked, and I like that word, I'm going to use it more often now instead of bottom up, but getting communities to talk about what they want, what our process has been, but it is an informal process. Governments can very well say, hey, look, you know, you guys are unnecessarily creating problems for us, get lost. We know, they can very well say that. I mean, we are trying under sometimes pretext of, you know, getting them together and say, look, you have your right. We're not talking about rights in the front, in the forefront. We say you have a right to get water. You are dense community. The city cannot say that you have to go 200 meters and fetch your water and come here. You have a right to get water at your doorstep. So the other levels of governments have said, the center or the state, you have a right to get water. But how do you connect the last mile? Who has a plan or a map saying these houses don't have water? This is the route by which you can get water and clean water. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And who can do it? Communities. Fine. Who's going to support them? They're not, they are hardly finding time to earn for their livelihood. Who's going to do it? And like India, Mexican, and all these countries are big, and there are too many people to do it. So it's a huge issue. And unless we have appropriate levels of participation recognized by the Act, and municipal officers or state government officials made responsible that they have to hear them properly, not as a, eyewash, it's not going to work. And there are huge issues there, Alena. I see you smiling, and we have to talk about it much more, yeah?
Thank you. I love how you just went in the flow and put down all those facts out there and how we're really narrowing this down to some concrete action points and recommendations. As I said, the purpose of the People's Summit is to come up with a people's roadmap and things that we would like to see or like to just point out, and we're really getting there. One point that I still have on my list, and we have around 15 minutes left, including wrapping up in final words. So one final question, and I don't know who to ask it to, so if you have any thoughts, just tell me that you want to respond to that one, is, well, Frank earlier pointed out that a lot of work with that third wave thing is delegated, a lot of government tasks are delegated to other actors. The fact that Manvita's NGO is signing memorandums of understanding with local governments, making those proposals, making PowerPoint presentations to train municipal officers is a perfect example of how work is outsourced. And the question here is, how do we ensure the accountability then? If non-elected people are doing a lot of the professionalization and the work, how do we ensure that that remains accountable? Frank is raising his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, accountability is one of these very artificial terms today. No, it's part of what we call the adaptive governance philosophy. So what do we mean by accountable? Being responsible for his or her own deeds, but I should not personalize this, because it's usually a collective, an agency that is responsible for enacting a particular project. So I think it's a priori, it's perfectly acceptable to delegate some responsibilities to a particular organization. The problem is that in the third wave, the delegation of responsibility at the same time meant economizing on welfare budgets, economizing on service budgets, and so on. So if we talk about accountability in this respect, it should, in the first instance, have been show to the citizenship that what is being done is cutting in public spending, is reducing resources for providing services to citizenship. Now, we can broaden the discussion on accountability, of course, and I think everybody should be accountable for what he or she is doing, taking into account the circumstances in which people have to do things. So if you are under severe pressure, or if you are excluded from the high tables of decision making, it's obvious that you cannot be as accountable as the people who decide, who are sitting at the high table of decision making, who are sitting in the mayor's lounge and so on. So there, in my view, there are different levels of accountability and ways of looking at accountability depending on the power position and the responsibilities you have in society, if you like. I mean,
any responses to that? Manvita, go ahead. And then Valeria afterwards.
Accountability is extremely important, and I would like to add a few aspects to what Frank said. Is one is when you are voted in power, because we're talking of democracies, you are making a promise to people. If you fail to promise, people would have a right to chuck you out. But unfortunately, the way our democracies are structured, I don't think so. It's a real, I mean, it's very controversial. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's probably not the right representation of what gets in to our, maybe that's my bias, but to look at how do we count for people's representation and getting them to power is a question we need to answer at some point. Democracies are important, but the way you probably get elected, we need to look at it. Or maybe all the time, majority is not right, and majority may not be the collective voice of people, because the way you divide your constituencies and the way you divide and count your vote, etc. It's a different discussion at some point we can do. But what I'm saying is the elected officials have to be accountable, and they're accountable to people and people who have voted or not voted for them. While those mechanisms don't exist appropriated, maybe technology, maybe young people like you all can find a way out to get that votes out. I'm not talking of just social media, because again, it's controlled by a few, but maybe some revolution and something has to happen around this. You have to really get people to observe and tell you the truth. Even now, today, media is also not probably portraying what everybody thinks. So in a situation like that, who would you trust? How would you get to the point of accountability? And how would you, if you find something which is incorrect or which you don't agree with, how do you voice your concern? Is my thought today. Yeah.
And Valeria.
Yes, I wanted to add that I think that accountability will take place as long as these communities or citizen groups or mobilizations, whatever you want to call them, realize that they also have to demand, as part of their agenda of demands to government or to whomever, they have to incorporate also the importance of the quality of policy making, right? Because citizen groups are not demanding these as part of the things they want to see happen, But if citizens are not demanding the importance of policymaking being transparent and accountable, then governments are never going to do it. And well, I think it is important to bear this point in mind. It's managerial. It has to do with public administration, and perhaps is boring. Because it's more fun or more important or more vital to be asking governments or whomever is in charge to develop to start providing a service, sanitation, waste management, and that's important, I understand. But the communities also need to ask governments or those agencies in power or making decisions that they need to be transparent and that they need to be accountable. If they are not doing that, then transparency, accountability is never going to happen.
I feel like you've already done your closing words with those incredibly poignant short statements. So thank you for that. We've covered a wide range of topics today, always focused on communities and what is this thing called governance. So we started off, as a quick recap, with the idea of the European Union and India investing heavily in high-tech smart cities, and then quickly discarded that topic and said, wait. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the fundamentals of who is involved, how do we plan, and a lot of places where smart cities are happening are already doing kind of okay. So that's in general for the more privileged in society, but let's take a step back and look at the marginalized. So that's kind of the perspective that we took here today. And then we established that bottom-linked governance is nice because bottom-up is too utopian, and looked at how incredibly important it is to communicate and how incredibly important individual agency also is in the individual people who are in positions of decision-making. So if this isn't inspiring to just start and get involved, then I don't know what. As a final word from each of you, I guess I can give you like 2 minutes per person for that. My recommendation in total would just be like the European Union, as a thesis statement almost, the European Union should pay attention to the diversity and the social context of the spaces of Indian cities in order to make its investments socially sensitive and sustainable. Give me your pitch. What would your conclusion be? I'll start with Frank.
All right, then the European Union should give up its model of technocracy, believing in the all-powerful power of technology, organizational models based on management science and so on. They have to reinvent their vision of society, which is a vision of a society that is very diverse. We illustrated that quite well in the previous hour and a half. So they have to take into account diversity, not only in terms of the population they're dealing with, but also in terms of the policy models they are using. They want to look at cities as smart cities. They are completely on the wrong track, unless they define smart as intelligent, empathetic, based on solidarity, mutual aid, and so on. But that's not the view that they advertise or they work with. In a way, in Europe, I risk to bypass my 1 minute, my 2 minutes, but I was rereading the history of ethics in the Western world, because I'm using it for a new book I'm preparing. And I was extremely interested by the role of community in the medieval cities. That's why I made a reference in my CV to I'm born in Bruges. And I said to myself, now I'm making a jump, but Valeria will understand for sure, that the Western world lost its mingas in the 15th or 16th century. In the 15th and 16th century, in the medieval cities, we had our mingas. We had our communities working towards joint projects in the form of professional associations, brotherhoods, people brought together for a particular housing project, for an expedition, and so on. And this model of cooperation, of mutual aid, got gradually lost in Western society, was reinvented in other forms at a much more higher scale, unions, for example, political parties, but these do not replace the importance, they do not replace mutual aid at the community level, at the very local level.
That was a clear statement. All right, Valeria, final word.
We have to reinvent the mingas in Western society.
Perfect. I need to look that word up, but Valeria will understand, as you said.
Yes.
Your final words for the day.
Well, just quickly, Mingas is, it's a community organizing group, and it's the word that it's given. I think it's Colombia, one of the several countries that use the word Minga, but it's South American sort of term. So my final words for the EU-India summit, the diplomatic one, is that they need to understand that partnership working has pathologies. These pathologies, they tend to be overlooked. So only the positive aspects about partnership working, which is bringing resources from other actors, communities, businesses, and bringing these resources in order to provide what it has been more difficult over time to provide for a community. However, the negative aspects or the pathologies tend to be overlooked, and cooperation, collaboration, partnership working also has downsides, which are around many of the things we discussed today. Distrust is one of them, fragmentation, the how slowly partnership working responds more to technocratic aims as opposed to empowering communities, for example. Partnership working in the end can tend to consolidate the power relationships, especially the dominant power of different groups. And also partnership can also depoliticize strong social movements that might challenge whatever it's been discussed. So I think the European and India summit should be aware of these pathologies and not romanticize partnership working as the document they have for the guiding document for their summit. I would also like to underline that they are focusing heavily on urban development, urban cities, and increasingly, and especially for countries like India, the rural landscape is also important. And there is, the urban and the rural are coming together as cities are expanding and growing. They are overtaking rural spaces, let's say. And there is a slow urbanization process, but there's somewhere in between, and how the rural can communicate with the urban and vice versa. So I think it is important not just to sit on the city, on the urban, but also how, this is expanding to other spaces.
That is true. The future is urban, and we're talking about urban futures, but that does not mean that there is no rural at all. Manvita, final words.
Urban is the future. And of course, I totally agree with Frank and Valeria that community engagement is extremely, extremely important. I'll bring the other perspective of getting our urban governance into focus. When India and European Union are talking about towards a better urban planning or urban development and urban futurist thinking, is that you need to decentralize, you need to municipalize, I would say, your activities and your functions. You have to strengthen the local governments because that level of the government is closest to the people. So the relationship between community and the local governments is unique, and you have to strengthen that. How do you do that? Maybe like we've tried for 20 years, is to create associations of cities. and you create informal networks of people and get people's network talk to city governments collectively together, and cities collectively speak to the state and the central government and tell them, hey, look, we are closest to the people, allow us to be and strengthen us, give us all the guidelines and powers, but we are people facing government. You have to have that confidence in our local governments, because they are the ones who are giving you water, sanitation, access to urban poor welfare schemes, entitlements. They are the forefront. I mean, from morning to night when you sleep, whatever services you are getting are from local governments. So rather be organized, work with your citizens, and that should be the way forward. For that, I would urge both European Unions and India Summit to do few things. One, maybe we create associations of cities. Second, we create city-city partnerships between your European cities and learn from India, and Indians would learn from European cities and find a third way of working together. There is neither European way or an Indian way, but it's a third way, and we have seen it. We have done 22 such partnerships UMC has done it over 25 years with cities in US, cities in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Afghanistan. And we have definitely, both the partners have benefited extremely, extremely from the process at the individual level and the collective level. And I would strongly urge that we need to reinvent this model of teaching, learning, unlearning together. I think I would end here. Thank you.
Wonderful. I also love that one of the points that you recommend, city-to-city partnerships, that is already, at least on paper, intended. So we do have hope there. On that note, we did talk about that the European Union is investing in energy security in India, and energy security is the topic of the next panel, which starts in half an hour. I think that it's a bunch of Indian origin scientists, so we'll really have that science perspective, and we'll be live streaming that on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube again. So on that note, I had a lot of fun. I love this little group that we formed here. It was a brilliant flow, and I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. So I wish you a wonderful afternoon, evening, and I'll get back to you with the final People's Blueprint.